Hello boys and girls, this is Sayar Henry and welcome back to another episode of Midweek Advice. Today's episode is kind of special in two ways. The first way it is special is that this is going to be the last episode of this year because we are approaching 2021, so it's going to be next year and this is the last episode for this year. And the second way this episode is going to be special is because I am going to deliver this episode entirely in English. The reason for that is in the previous episode, I didn't get any comments asking me questions. So it seemed to me as if there was no more reason for me to continue putting out these episodes, because there was no one who is asking me questions, right? It was almost like that. But last week, luckily, one student came under one of my YouTube videos and he wrote a comment and he wrote a question. And not just that, he wrote the question in English. So it's only fair that I respond to that question in English, right? So here we are. Without further ado, let's jump in and read his comment together. I want to know how can we keep reading English books, meaning English novels, because when I start reading English books, after 10 or 15 pages, I feel like I don't understand what the writer means so far. As a result, I am afraid and lazy to read the whole book. So could you please share what is the best way to read English books for language learners, for English learners like me? Okay. Now, this question actually represents a lot of language learners out there. So, thank you for asking. Before answering this question, I have to address a few things that you have to keep in mind when you decide to read a novel. Well, as you all know, reading novels, English novels and stories is probably the best way to train your brain to think in English, which is why I always recommend it to every student. But unfortunately, sometimes some students take this advice the wrong way. I mean, they tend to look for the heaviest piece of literature they can find and try to dive into that. So it's only natural that they're going to fail because they feel bored along the way. I don't know why they choose that kind of books. Maybe they are already familiar with the name of the author, or maybe they are intrigued by the title of the book or the topic of the book, the subject matter of the book, or maybe that's the only book they can access. I don't know why. But whatever it might be, whenever a student tries to read a novel that has a much higher vocabulary range and a much higher complexity of sentence structure than he is capable of, he surely will find it boring and fall asleep midway through, or even after the first chapter. And in the worst case scenario, it can even lead to losing excitement to read more books. So it's also important to realize that comprehension is the key to continuing your work. When people try to do something that they cannot really comprehend, they always find it boring and then they feel sleepy or they even fall asleep. That's natural. That's because there is no comprehension. So whenever you want to read something, a novel especially, try to find a book that you can comprehend about 60 to 80% without referring to dictionaries or grammar books. And when I say 60 to 80% comprehension, I mean in terms of vocabulary, grammar, context, and cultural references. Okay? Because these four factors are absolutely crucial for comprehension. So let me repeat again. Words, sentence structures, context, and cultural references. Okay? So when you choose a book, try to pick wisely. Try to find a balance between difficulty and interest. That's how you look for a book. After you find the right book for you, let's say you have the right book for you and you try to complete it. There are two ways you can do. Okay? The first way is extensive reading, and the second way is intensive reading. What is the difference between this and that? Let me explain. Extensive reading is all about quantity. So it's about moving forward with limited knowledge without worrying about comprehension at all. So in extensive reading, the reader has to flip through page after page, one after another, focusing on the words and sentence structures they have already known elsewhere. Okay? In extensive reading, the goal here is to focus on things you have already know and keep moving forward with limited knowledge. Okay? Now, the other way, on the other hand, is intensive reading. Intensive reading is all about quality. It's the opposite of extensive reading. In intensive reading, the goal here is to focus on the new words and new sentence structures, things that you don't know already or things that you are not familiar with, and try to understand and acquire as many new things as you can. So intensive reading definitely, obviously takes more time and is much more energy demanding task than extensive reading, but it is also much more rewarding. Okay? Now we have two ways to read. What do I recommend? Should students read extensively or intensively? Well, my recommendation is to use both ways, but in a smart way. So the first thing I want you to do is find out how long you can read extensively until your mind gets tired. Okay? So let's say you can read for about an hour. You can read extensively for about an hour. Then you note that number down. Then on the next day, okay, it has to be on a different day, try to read the same pages that you read before. Try to repeat these pages, but this time with intensive reading. And observe how long you can go in one sitting without burning out. Okay? Let's say you can read intensively for 30 minutes. Now what do we have? We have two sets of numbers, right? 60 minutes for extensive reading and 30 minutes for intensive reading. What do we do with these numbers? Well, these are your upper limits for extensive reading and intensive reading. In other words, these are your breaking points. It means if you go beyond that, you will break. And when you break down, when you go beyond your breaking point, you will not enjoy the process and you will not want to come back for more the next day. That's why it's really important to know your limit. Okay? So now that you know you have your limits, what do? The next day, set your reading limit for extensive reading for about maybe 45 minutes or 30 minutes, for example. Set your time limit for 30 minutes and read extensively as further as you can. Then stop reading, take a rest for a while, maybe 5 minutes. Then repeat the same pages, but this time with intensive reading for about 15 minutes. So you have a total of 45 minutes of reading, right? 30 minutes of extensive reading and 15 minutes of intensive reading. While you do intensive reading, it's not necessary that you have to cover all the pages you read in extensive reading. You only need to set your time for 15 minutes and try to cover as thoroughly as you can. When you combine the reading hour, it's well below your upper limit for extensive reading as well as intensive reading, right? Just 1 hour in total. So you don't feel tired, you don't feel bored, you don't feel depleted or consumed by just one reading session. Okay? That means you are going to want to repeat the same process the next day. You're going to enjoy reading. That's the key here. So that's one example of doing it. Let's say you have more time, you can give more time. So you can read maybe 45 minutes in the morning with extensive reading, and then review these pages with intensive reading at night for about maybe 20 minutes. Remember, the goal here is to read below your limit, okay? That way, you will be always fresh to start the next session. And you will always want to come back for more the next day, and the next day, and the next day. So that's how you train your reading. Okay? So to sum up, if you intend to read novels, then the first thing is to choose your book wisely. Choose your novel wisely. A balance between difficulty and interest. Okay? Then the other thing to do is to figure out what are your limits. Okay? Your extensive reading limit and your intensive reading limit. After you know these, try to plan accordingly so that you always feel refreshed enough for another reading session every day. I hope this tip helps you, and I am sure that if you incorporate this tip into your reading journey, you will definitely enjoy more than you did before. Well, this is it for this week and also for this year. If you find this kind of videos helpful, or if you want to see more videos like this, it is important that you ask me a question, because these episodes are based on students' questions, your questions. Without your question, I cannot continue the series. So if you have a thought about language learning, or if you are curious about something related to language learning or education or personal development, write down in the comment section and ask me, okay? Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next year. Goodbye.